Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and this is a free 1-hour tutorial for the amazing Nikon D500. If you have a different camera, or if you want to send your friends to a place to get their own tutorials, visit this shortcut, sdp.io/tutorials, where you'll find tutorials for just about every modern camera out there. First, I'm gonna cover all the stuff that I think you need to know to take great pictures with the D500. I'm not gonna get into some things like the retouching menus, things that aren't core to photography. There's lots of features that you can dig into if you want to, but that I don't tend to use on a daily basis, so I'm gonna spare you that, try to move things along more quickly. Let's start with the physical controls on the camera. If you're more advanced and you've already figured this stuff out, go ahead and jump forward. There's a table of contents in the description of this video, so you don't have to watch the whole thing, jump right to where you want. But at the end of the video, note that I go over some recommended lenses and other accessories for the camera, so you might want to jump forward to that before you finish the video. On the right side here, you'll find 2 memory cards. This is your digital film that stores your pictures on there. The top one here is an XQD card, and at this time in history, XQD cards are kind of unusual and rare. They're super fast. They're way faster than currently available CF or SD cards, and for that reason, that's the card you're going to want to use for things like sports and wildlife, and that should just be your main card. There's also a card here which I use as a backup, which is an SD card. You can configure the 2 cards to work together in different ways. Either like all the pictures go to the XQD card, and when it fills up, they roll over to the SD card, or you can have the camera write a copy of pictures to both cards simultaneously. That's really, really useful if you have a memory card failure, because then you won't lose your picture. So you can imagine if you're shooting an important event, like a wedding or a sports event that you can't go back and reshoot, it would be really important to write it to both cards because memory card failures do happen. I'll quickly show you how to configure the camera. There's a menu button in the upper left corner here. Hit the menu button, and now you'll see along the left side different icons here. I'll tell you which icon to use as we go through the video. I'm going to pick the camera icon here, and right on page 1 here, you'll see primary slot selection. And if I scroll to the right with the directional pad here, you can see I can choose either the XQD slot or the SD card slot. Assuming you have an XQD card, which you should, go ahead and pick that one. And then for the secondary slot function, you can choose either to overflow when one card fills up right to the other, backup right to both cards simultaneously, or write RAW to the primary card and JPEG to the secondary card. I'll talk a little bit about RAW versus JPEG formats later, but if you don't care or you don't know yet, just shoot RAW for the time being. So that's how the 2 cards work. I'm going to set that to backup for my own purposes. Let's look at some other physical ports on the camera. On the left side here, we have at the very top a USB 3 port. This is great for tethering. This makes it really, really fast, so you can hook up your camera to a computer while you're shooting in the studio, for example. Check our YouTube channel. We have a whole video that covers how we do tethering, and this camera works great for that. If you're shooting some video, the second cover here has both a headphone and a mic jack. This camera shoots great 4K video, but the sound from the on-camera mic is always going to be bad on any camera. So if you want to get decent sound, you're always going to be rigging in an external mic from here. We use the Sennheiser EW100 G3s as a lavalier mic, but you also want to be monitoring the sound just so you know when wind comes in. So that's where the ports are. This bottom port here probably isn't as useful. That's an HDMI port, but you might use it for a field recorder to record video, or if you're just on vacation and you want to put your pictures up on the hotel TV, you could get a mini HDMI to HDMI cable and hook it up to the TV and play the pictures back that way. I personally don't use the HDMI port that often. There are some other, there's another physical port down here, which is for the battery. Slide this little notch here down and the battery cover pops open, then pull the yellow tab back and the battery pops right out. You'll want to get a couple of these batteries, especially if you plan on using the wireless features, because that will burn through the batteries. Push it in until it clicks, then close this, and it should click closed. Putting the lens on and taking off is pretty self-explanatory. There's a button here on the left side. Hold that down, then twist the lens clockwise until it comes off. When you want to put a lens on, match the white dot here to the white dot on the body, then twist it counterclockwise until it clicks, and then just twist it back and forth. Make sure it's locked on there nice and solid. Let's talk about how to turn the lights on the camera on. It's too bright in here to really see this, but this camera has a great set of lights. All these buttons will light up so you can see them in complete darkness, and that makes night photography so much easier because you don't have to memorize the placement of every button. To turn the lights on, just use the power switch here. You can go off, on, or turn it one more twist. It'll pop in and then pop back, and that turns the lights on. You can't see it, but these are lit up, and the LCD screen up here is lit up. Just remember, if it gets in the dark, do that, and you'll be able to find your way around. You can control what that does. Go into the menus, go to the pencil icon, and then go to Controls, F, scroll to the right, and it'll go down to F9. This controls what the light switch does. So if I scroll to the right with the directional pad here, you can see the default is to turn on the LCD backlight, as well as backlighting all these buttons. I can also change this to bring up the information display by selecting that, and I'll just show you what that does. Normally, if you push the info button here, it brings up this screen that tells you your current settings. Another option is to just pull this to the side, and now it's turning on the lights and bringing that up. If you find yourself hunting for that info button a lot, you can make it more convenient by putting right there on your shutter finger. It basically means you don't have to take your finger off the shutter. Once you take a picture, well, first I'll show you how to take a picture. By default, you'll put the shutter button, push the shutter button halfway, the camera will focus, and then when you push the shutter all the way, it will actually take a picture. To review your pictures, it might pop up automatically depending on what the settings are, or you can push the play button here to see your last photo. And there you can see the inside of our studio. To browse through different settings, push up on the directional pad here. And you can see by default, it's going to switch through usually just a couple of these different screens. But it will allow you to see your histogram here, which tells you how much brightness and darkness there is in the picture. It can tell you if parts of the picture are overexposed. One really nice thing about this is you have a touch screen, so you can just do this, and you can pan around like that. And I find this so useful for checking the critical focus on everybody's eyes, especially when like shooting a group shot. So I'll zoom back here, and now I can also pan through with my finger like this. Makes things really, 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 really easy. Oh, there's some pictures of a deer that I took. You can customize this a little bit. I'll hit the menu button here and scroll to the left, and all the way at the top, you'll see the playback menu here. And this gives you a bunch of options for what comes up in playback. So the most useful is the fourth option down, which is playback display option. So if I select that, I can choose which options I scroll between. For example, you might want to see the focus point. I don't care about that. I only care if it's in focus or not, and seeing the focus point doesn't tell you that it was necessarily in focus, so it doesn't add a lot. But some people will want to see the RGB histogram. Again, the regular histogram is fine by me. I'm scrolling to the right to select those check boxes. Then when I'm done, notice it says OK down here. You can't just hit the menu button or it will forget your settings. So I'm going to push OK so it remembers it. And so now when I review pictures and I scroll up, you can see there it's showing me the focusing point. And when I scroll up a couple of times, okay, now it's showing me the RGB histogram because I just turned that option on. Now you can customize which things you scroll between. Normally, you'll get the best results when you just put your eye up to the viewfinder and shoot like this. Holding your eye up to the viewfinder helps to stabilize the camera. It also gives you like an actual real-time feed of what's going on and lets you really see what's going on through the lens. Focusing will be much, much faster when you hold your eye up to the viewfinder like that. You can use live view display by pushing the LV button down here. This works just like your smartphone, and it displays the real data coming from the camera in real time. Now, I can push the info button here to scroll between different overlays on the live view. So this is actually a virtual horizon, which I find really useful for any type of shooting. I like to get the horizon as level as possible. Or you can just hide all the information so you can really focus on what you're doing. Just repeatedly push the info button until you're happy with the display. I love live view because I can tilt this screen out and tilt it up like that. So if I have the camera low to the ground on a tripod, the combination of live view and the tilty screen mean I don't have to get on my hands and knees and try to put my eye to the viewfinder. I can also tilt it down like that and hold the camera over my head when I'm shooting over a crowd, for example, at an event. Super, super useful. And you can touch the screen to focus and take a shot. Now, this camera has the best focusing when you're using the viewfinder and not the best focusing when you're using the live view display, but it will focus. It takes a beat, and it's going to be a little slower. So you're not going to be using this for sports or really wildlife. You'll be using the viewfinder. But if you're just taking some pictures at a kid's birthday party or some kind of event, you can touch the screen and it should work just fine. You can adjust the brightness of the display. The auto brightness generally works okay. But if you find you want it to be brighter, I'll just show you where that is. I'll hit the menu button, go to the wrench icon, and right on the first page here, you'll see monitor brightness. Scroll to the right, and there you can make it brighter or darker. Be sure you hit OK afterwards. There's separate settings here for menus playback and live view. Now, notice as I'm doing all this, I'm using the directional pad rather than using the touchscreen, because the touchscreen works a lot of the time, but it doesn't work in the menus unless you're typing something. When you are using the viewfinder, it's important that you understand what the diopter is. The diopter can basically dial in a glasses prescription into your camera. Even if you don't wear glasses, you should know what this is, because sometimes the diopter will get hit accidentally, and then you'll look through the viewfinder and everything will be messed up. So right now, and anytime it seems like everything's blurry in your viewfinder, hold your camera up and grab this little diopter dial here. Hold your camera up and look at the numbers on the bottom, and then pull it out and twist it until all the numbers are sharp. So this one shouldn't ever get hit accidentally, but it still seems to happen. You just have to pop it out with your fingernail and then twist it and then push it back in to kind of lock it in place. Diopters are great if you want to take your glasses off and look through it, as long as you don't trade your camera with other people, because then they'll be a little confused when everything is blurry in the viewfinder. Let's talk about the different camera modes that give you control over your aperture, shutter speed, and really what your end pictures look like. The mode that I use most often is Aperture Priority. Now your camera will probably come preset to P mode, which is program mode, and that's a go-to mode if you're feeling overwhelmed by your settings or if you're giving the camera to somebody else. In P mode, the camera will basically make up its own mind. You can see this shows the mode up here in the upper left corner, and when I hit the info button here, it'll show it again in the upper left corner. To change that, I'm going to hold down the mode button here on the left side of the camera, and then I'm going to move the main dial until it shows A up here too. That's aperture priority. Aperture is how big or small the iris of the lens is. And you know, one nice thing about Nikon lenses is the aperture itself is mechanical. So maybe we can see down this. So I can move this lever and you can actually see the aperture at work. And when it's wide open like that, I'm using a low f-stop number, f1.8 on this particular lens. And when it's small like that, I'm using a high f-stop number like f16 or f22. Now that you're in aperture priority mode, you can change your f-stop number by moving the dial on the front here. It's always the dial on the front. So I'll hit the info button there so we can see. And now as I move this dial here with my index finger, you can see the f-stop number here is changing. Now the shutter speed is also changing, but that's because the camera is automatically adjusting the shutter speed to compensate for more or less light that it's getting through the aperture. So it's handling the exposure automatically, giving you control of just this one number, the f-stop number. And if you don't know how that will change the results of your pictures, check out chapter 4 of my book, Stunning Digital Photography, where I explain everything. This is the same for every camera made for the last 150 years. That's just how aperture works. I also have a free video here at sdp.io/fstop. I'm going to give you lots of links to other free videos for topics that you want to know and more information about, but my books are really the best source. Here's a physical diagram just showing what different f-stops might look like in a lens. And those f-stops, besides controlling the amount of light that's coming in, they also control the amount of background blur in your picture. These shots are taken on a full-frame camera with an 85mm lens. At f1.8 on the left, you can see Chelsea there is nice and sharp, but this New York street in the background is completely blurred. Dropping the f-stop to f8, things in the background start to become sharp. You can make out details, but they're still distinctly blurry. And all the way at f22, everything is perfectly sharp. So that's the sort of drastic difference controlling the f-stop can have on your final image results, and that's why aperture priority is so useful, and the mode that I use most of the time. Now, if I'm shooting any sort of action, movement, people running, a bird flying, something like that, I will switch to shutter priority where I can control how long the shutter stays open. Most people think that the shutter of their camera fires in an instant, but it's open for a period of time, a precise period of time. On this camera, the fastest period of time is 1/8,000th of a second, which really is almost an instant. Almost nothing will show movement at 1/8,000th of a second. A hummingbird's wings will be a little bit blurry, but just about anything else will be frozen. You can also keep the shutter open for a full 30 seconds or even longer if you're taking pictures in just absolute darkness. For example, if you're taking pictures of the night sky in a rural area, you will use those kinds of super long shutter speeds. If you want to know more about how shutter speeds work, visit this link, sdp.io/settings, where I'll kind of walk you through what each of the different settings on a camera makes, the difference that they make. To switch to shutter priority, hold down the mode button here, just like you did before, and then move the main dial until you see an S. Right there, S. You can see it on the info display here too. S for shutter priority. Now, when I move the main dial here, that's changing the shutter speed. So you can see now it's at 1/60th of a second. I can go down to 1/5 of a second or 1 full second. When you see the double quotes like that, it means 1 full second. Here are 3 examples taken at different shutter speeds. On the left, you see my daughter at 1/8 of a second. I'm on one of those spinny merry-go-round things facing her, so I'm also spinning. She looks sharp, but you can see how much the background is blurred. At 1/30th of a second, the background is still blurred some, and at 1/125th of a second, we're still moving at the same speed, but the background is now completely frozen. So that's the types of different effects that you can achieve by using shutter priority. Again, chapter 4 of my book, Stunning Digital Photography, teaches you everything you need to know about when and why to change your shutter speed. If you want to control both the aperture and the shutter speed at the same time, use manual mode. Manual mode is designated by an M. Hold down the mode button here, move the main dial until you see an M up in the left corner there. Manual mode. Now, just like in shutter priority, I can move the dial back here, and just like in aperture priority, I can move this dial to change the f-stop number. Now, if you have auto ISO turned on, we'll cover that in a second, the camera will automatically maintain your exposure by adjusting the ISO speed. So you can still take properly exposed pictures even though you adjust the shutter speed and aperture, because the camera is adjusting the sensitivity to light. There's actually 3 different settings that control how bright the picture is going to be. You're controlling 2 of them at this point, the camera's controlling the other one. If you turn off auto ISO and you go to manual ISO, the camera will still give you a clue as to the proper exposure. You can see this indicator here tells you how bright or how dark the picture is going to be. When it's going to the left there, it means the picture is going to be dark or underexposed. And when it moves over to the right, the picture is going to be too bright or overexposed. So if you're in manual mode, you probably want to control the exposure, but if you want a clue from the camera as to what the proper exposure is, you'll try to keep it right in the middle there. For detailed information, visit sdp.io/go-manual. Manual mode is not hard. There's a very simple process to get all your settings perfect. I show you in that video, so don't sweat it. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, chapter 4 of my book, Stunning Digital Photography, walks you through all of this in a much more structured and easy way than watching a bunch of YouTube videos. And the ebook version is only $10. You can get a paperback too for about $20. Get them at Amazon. You can search for Tony Northrup or Stunning Digital Photography and you'll see my books. Or buy it from us directly. We ship worldwide at sdp.io/store. If you get into post-processing, we have a book on Adobe Lightroom. I have a book on camera gear where it'll tell you all the confusing things like what focus breathing is, and will help you get the good value for your money when you're buying gear. This book can really save you thousands of dollars. I have a book on Photoshop if you get really intense with your editing, and I have an entire series of beginning photography videos for those people who prefer to watch rather than read. All these books, though, they're video books, and they come with at least 10 hours of video. So you can read the book and watch the videos that are mixed in, or just do one or the other, depending on your particular learning style. We offer just a much better value than any other training system out there, and we've helped tens of hundreds of thousands of people get started learning photography. I'm going to just share some links for different styles of photography. Night photography, taking pictures at night. You can actually do that. Not everybody knows that. I have some tutorials at sdp.io/np. Landscape photography, sdp.io/ls. That tutorial will give you a brief overview. These are free tutorials. Wildlife photography, visit this link, sdp.io/wl. Now let's go over bulb mode, which keeps the shutter open for an indefinite period of time, something longer than 30 seconds. So I'm still in manual mode here. And if I hit the info button here, I can move the back dial, go to 1 second, and keep scrolling to the left, and I'll get to 30 seconds here. That's the longest timed exposure on this camera and most cameras for no reason I can figure out. I don't know why they don't let you go to 10 minutes. They always stop at 30 seconds. If I click one more to the left, I'll see bulb mode. And in bulb mode, the shutter stays open as long as I hold my finger down on the shutter. So I can hold it down here for a couple of seconds and let go, and my picture's probably going to be completely white because it's bright in here, and a 2-second exposure would be too much. If you're reading Stunning Digital Photography and I tell you to use bulb mode, don't actually use bulb mode. Here's what you should do instead. Using the main dial here, instead of selecting bulb mode, or tick to the left until you see time. And what time will do is open and close the shutter when you push the shutter release button. So I'll push it once, and now the shutter's open. And what I should do now is set an alarm on my watch or something for 2 minutes or 10 minutes or however long I want to keep the shutter open. And then when I'm done, I can push it one more time to close the shutter. And that's just a smarter way than trying to hold your finger down on the shutter button. It gets around having to have a remote shutter release. Thanks Nikon for putting that nice time feature in. I find it really useful. Let's talk about the different shutter modes. When you get your camera, it's probably going to be in single shutter mode, which is controlled by this dial on the left here. S is single shutter mode, and if I hold down the button, the shutter button, it will take just one picture. Let's get this something faster. Okay. Even if I keep holding my finger on there, it's one picture. If I switch it to CL, that's continuous low mode, a slower mode. If I hold it down, by default, I think it takes 5 frames a second, so pretty fast. If there's a little release I have to push here, I push that down and then twist it over to CH. This is the mode I use basically all the time. Continuous high. That's 10 frames a second. That's really fast. It actually takes a little practice to just squeeze off 1 frame at a time. But it's okay to just snap off a couple of frames, especially if there's any sort of movement in the frame. If it's just, even if it's just people being casual, if you take one picture, they might blink, or they might just have a funny kind of micro expression at that moment. Rattle off 2 or 3 pictures and odds are good, one of those 3 will be better than the other 2, just because everything's always moving. Now, another reason I like to use continuous high mode is that you shake the camera a little bit when you push the shutter. So if you take one picture, it's definitely going to have that shutter shake in it. You also shake the camera a little bit when you let your finger off the shutter. So if you take 2 pictures, the first picture will have shutter shake from pushing it, and the second picture will have shake from releasing the shutter. So if I really want a picture to be sharp and I'm hand holding it, I'll take 3 pictures. And much of the time, that second picture is going to be sharper than the first or the third, because for that second picture, my finger's not moving. I'm just holding the camera steady. If you're worried about any sort of shake happening, take more pictures. It's easy, it's free, it doesn't cost you anything. And then back at your computer, you can go through and pick the sharpest one of those pictures and delete all the others. Just improves your odds of getting a really sharp picture. There is a way to customize the shutter modes. I'll hit the menu button here, go to the pencil icon, and then under D, shooting display, I'll go to D1, which is the CL shooting speed. You can see it's set to 5 frames a second by default. If that's still too fast, if you just wanted to slow down a little bit, you could set it to 4 frames a second, or you could even have it go all the way up to 7 or 8 or 9 frames a second. Anyway, you can customize it. This next option here, D2, the max continuous release, is set to 200 frames by default. So if I have it in CH mode, continuous high mode, and I throw it in my bag with the camera turned on and that shutter button is held down, it will keep doing that. It could do it forever. And there was a problem with that. Eventually, the camera would just die because it would do, 100,000 shots or 200,000 shots and the shutter would break or you'd run out of batteries. So Nikon put a limit in there. It won't take more than 200 pictures. If 200 pictures seems like too much for you, you can dial that down to something lower, but you can't go above 200. There's no like infinite setting, not that I'm really looking for that. After continuous high on the shutter dial here, you see Q and QC. So Q is just like S mode. It takes one shot when you hold your finger on the shutter, but it's a little bit quieter. And QC is quiet continuous. So you can hear on my mic, that's continuous high, and this is quiet continuous. It's just a little bit quieter. Also on the shutter dial is a self timer. So I'll hold this release again and twist this over to the little clock looking thing there. And what this does is it starts a self timer. So when I push the shutter button, it doesn't fire right away. Instead, it blinks this little red light and waits, I think, 10 seconds by default to take a picture. So you'll use this when you want a group picture and you want yourself in the picture. You put the camera on a tripod, set it to the self timer, and then run around and put your arm around your family and everybody smiles. There's a better way though, because that's only going to take one picture. And Bobby's going to like ruin it by doing the rabbit ear thing. Go into the menus here. Menu. The pencil icon, and then C3, self timer. And now the top option here allows us to configure the actual delay. 10 seconds is good for running around to see your family. If you have the camera on a tripod and you just want to completely eliminate shutter shake, 2 seconds is really good for that. So macro photography, landscape photography, I'll change it to 2 seconds and use it. But 10 seconds is good for the selfies. Then I increase the number of shots. And for group portraits, I'll just set it to 9. That way it will take 9 shots with the default delay of 1/2 second between them. You can change the delay too. Sometimes a couple of seconds gives people a little bit of time and people will hear the shutter and kind of get used to the rhythm. So with that set, I can push the shutter and it's going to wait 10 seconds and then it's going to take 9 shots with a 2-second delay. And this works really well. Just tell people it's going to take 9 shots, 2 seconds in between each, and people will kind of learn to smile. And I bet by shot 4 or 5, people are going to have more natural expressions. They'll get all their blinking and discomfort out, and out of those 10 shots, you'll find one that's really better than anything else. The D500 is like the world's greatest sports and wildlife camera, and the focusing modes on it are super, super important. By default, it's probably using all the autofocus points, which I don't find that useful because I like to pick a specific point to focus on. I don't like to leave it up to the camera to decide where to focus. It'll focus on the wrong person in a soccer game. So the first thing I'll do is select a single focusing point. That's my favorite focusing mode. To change the focusing mode, there's a button right here on the front of the camera. It's kind of a weird place. You'll see AF for autofocus and M for manual focus, but we'll leave it on AF, and then I'll hold this down. And you can use the top screen here, but this is easier for the camera to see. So as I hold it down, you can see it changes the display to show the focus mode, area mode. And now I can use both the front and back dial to change different aspects of the focusing mode. So the first thing to change is when you first turn it on, you'll probably have this displayed, AFS, and all focusing points. So if I scroll through the different options here, you can see I can choose from either a big block of all the focusing points, a group of focusing points, or a single focusing point. All focusing points is almost never the right option. Maybe if you're shooting flying birds against a solid background like a nice blue sky or a cloudy sky, maybe that's the right option. Group focusing is sometimes the right option. If you cannot keep a single focusing point on your subject because it's moving around too much, the group AF will make it a little easier to keep that subject, keep the focusing points on the subject. The third option here is the one I use basically all the time, which is a single focusing point. You'll see it when you look through the viewfinder too. That single focusing point is much more precise and lets you really make up your mind. Those focusing points go all the way to the edges of the frame, and when you have a single focusing point selected, use this thumb dial here to select which focusing point. Now, again, holding down the autofocus button here to change our settings, I'll show you the different modes here on the back. You can choose between AFS and AFC. On this camera, I always use AFC because I never have to use focus recompose because the focusing points go out to the corners. Also, AFC is incredibly accurate, so on some lower end bodies, I might have to switch between AFS and AFC, but on this camera, AFC pretty much always does the trick for me. One more trick I want to show you about focusing, and that's my absolute favorite. I use this almost all the time, 3D focusing mode. With 3D focusing mode, you can use a single autofocus point, put it on your subject, and then recompose the picture, and the camera will track the subject as it moves through the frame. You can use it to focus and recompose if you need to. You can also use it to track sports like soccer or a subject that's moving through the frame. For example, if I'm shooting soccer, I might start shooting somebody in the middle of the frame, but then as they start running towards my left, I want to position them in the right side of the frame to follow the compositional guideline, the rule of space, something I cover in Chapter 2 of Stunning Digital Photography. So I want to recompose, but I could do that by moving the focusing point over to the right and then refocusing on the subject. But that can be a little slow because I'm constantly moving the focusing point around while shooting sports. By using 3D focusing, I can select a focusing point in the middle of the frame, put it on my subject, focus by holding the shutter button halfway down or pressing the AF on button, and then I can move the camera and put them anywhere in the frame, and the camera will automatically track the subject that I focused on. Try it out. 3D focusing is absolutely awesome. I have a discussion of it in our review of the D500. So I'll just turn that on by, again, hitting the info button here and scrolling this front dial until I see 3D there. It'll also show 3D here. Just try it out. Once you focus, keep holding the shutter button down, and then you can move the frame and it will stay locked on your subject. Oh, for detailed information about different focusing modes, visit sdp.io/focus. That's free. Because this is a sophisticated sports and wildlife camera, the focusing system can be tuned. I have never had a need to tune it. The default behavior seems fantastic, and when I have tuned it, it has actually made things worse. But maybe you'll find that the focusing system isn't doing exactly what you expect. Maybe you're in a very specialized situation. I just want to show you where that is. I'll hit the menu button here, go to the pencil, and then menu A, autofocus. And you can see all these different options for adjusting how the focusing system works. For example, I like 3D tracking face detection, so I've turned that on. And you can see when you do turn an option on, it will show a little asterisk above the A. You can see I've also changed the AF activation to be AF on only instead of shutter AF on. I'll discuss that in a little bit. But here's another option I like is focus point wraparound. If you are changing the focusing points and you're on the right side, you can just go one more to the right and it will wrap around to the left. This camera has so many focusing points that just shifting focusing points from the left side to the right side can take a long time, so that makes life a little bit easier. This last option here, A12 focus point options, has some other options that can, again, you probably don't ever need to change these, but there they are in case you do want to tune your focusing system. Back button focus is a technique that changed my photography, and everybody I know who's tried it, almost everybody, ends up using it and loving it, and once you learn to use back button focus, you'll never switch away. But for the first 2 days, use back button focus, it's going to feel real weird. With back button focus, you decouple focusing's activation from the shutter button. So now when you push the shutter button halfway, the camera comes on, but doesn't try to focus. Instead, if you want the camera to focus, you push the AF on button on the back. So now instead of just working your index finger, you're working your index finger and your thumb. Anytime you're focusing on a moving subject, you're just holding the AF on button down while you're holding the shutter button down. So you're focusing and you're shooting at the same time. If you want the camera to stop focusing, you don't push the AF on button. And this is so useful. For example, if you're shooting night photography, it can be really hard to focus in really low light. So when your camera does get focus, you'll want to take several shots to make sure you have a shot that's not shaky. If you have focusing attached to the shutter button here, every time you go to take the second picture, the camera will automatically try to refocus, and that will ruin your focus. You never have to worry about that. The camera with back button focusing enabled only turns on when you push AF on, so you're in control of the focusing system. I have a whole video about it. Visit sdp.io/YBB, that link there in the lower left corner. And I'll hit the menu button here and show you how to turn it on. It's under Pencil A8. So go to autofocus and then A8, AF activation. And instead of shutter AF on, I'm gonna select just AF on. And then I usually do enable for the out of focus release. If you turn off out of focus release, then it won't focus it won't shoot when it thinks you don't have it focused, but you're looking through the viewfinder, so you can kind of decide for yourself. And if it takes too many pictures, that's usually okay too. Sometimes you'll want to manually focus. Now, there's this common misconception that real pros always use manual focus, and that's just not true. The vast majority of pros use autofocus because it's faster and more accurate than you could possibly be, especially with an SLR like this, which doesn't have focusing aids like split prism. If you do want to manually focus, I suggest, most lenses, you can just not push the AF on button. If you're using back button focus, don't push the AF on button and just focus with the lens. That's all you have to do. You don't have to make any switches. If you aren't using back button focus and you want to disable focus, autofocus, hit the switch here and switch it over to M. Most lenses will also have an autofocus and manual focus switch, but on Nikon cameras, on this camera, you don't have to worry about that. Just use the switch on the body because it's easier because it's always in the same place. Let's talk about changing the ISO. Besides your aperture and your shutter speed, the third setting that controls the brightness of your image is the ISO. It's not pronounced ISO. It is not spelled out because it's not an acronym. You don't believe me, but visit sdp.io/ISO. I have a full discussion of what exactly ISO is for you. It's also in chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography, but I'll just show you. There's an ISO button right here. Just hold that down. Hold that down, and then you can adjust the dial on the back here to manually configure a specific ISO setting. Hold it down and push the main dial on the front to switch between ISO and auto ISO. Now, even as a pro, I generally use auto ISO almost all the time. Almost all the time except for when I'm in the studio, when I'm shooting night photography, or when exposure is really, really weird. But I almost always prefer to use auto exposure. And even when I'm in manual mode, I'll use auto ISO for that reason. But that's how you turn it on and off. Now let's talk about exposure compensation. When you are using any sort of auto exposure, whether you're in aperture priority, shutter priority, or manual mode with auto ISO, the camera will make its best guess about a scene. But if you're taking a picture of somebody in a snowy field, there's going to be so much white in the scene that the camera's going to see all that white coming at it and think it needs to dial the exposure back and make everything darker. As a result, pictures with bright backgrounds tend to be underexposed. On the other hand, if you're taking a picture of somebody against a really bright sky, the camera will see that brightness and dial it back. I shouldn't have said on the other hand, because that's the same situation. Those are two situations when the camera will underexpose. If you have a bright subject against a dark background, for example, a white goose on a really dark river, the goose itself will end up overexposed unless you tell the camera to expose differently than its default. You can do that with exposure compensation. This camera has a little plus minus button right here. See it with the green dot? It says plus minus. You hold that down. And now I can use the main dial in the back here to adjust the exposure compensation up to make the picture brighter or down to make it darker. So if I turn on live view here, we can kind of see the effect. So now the picture is really dark. Hold down that exposure compensation button and then drag it up to make everything brighter or make everything darker. By default, you'll see your actual exposure in live view. So if you want to know that you're nailing the exposure without having to shoot and chimp, adjust the exposure compensation and reshoot, just turn on live view and you'll know the exact results that you're getting before you actually shoot it. I like to make a change to the default exposure compensation setting. So I'm going to hit the menu button here, go to the pencil icon, B4, I feel like I'm playing bingo, easy exposure compensation. I'll scroll to the right here and I'm going to select on auto reset. That does a couple of things. For one, it means that now when I'm in Aperture Priority mode, let me switch to Aperture Priority mode. Aperture Priority or Shutter Priority mode or program mode, anything with manual mode. Now I can adjust the exposure compensation without holding down that button. I don't like holding down the button. I'd rather just move the back dial. It also means that this happens to me all the time. I adjust the exposure compensation up or down, and then I forget, and then later I pick up the camera hours later and I start taking pictures, and all my pictures are under or overexposed because I didn't change the setting back. With the auto reset set to on, it will automatically go back to turning off exposure compensation after you turn the camera off. So I'll turn the camera off and turn it back on. And now you can see exposure compensation is back to 0. That is a shoot saver. Every pro out there has had an entire set ruined because they forgot to reset exposure compensation. Auto reset, oh my God, it's the best features. Be sure you turn that on. Oh, for detailed information about using exposure compensation, visit sdp.io/EC. It's another free tutorial. RAW is a different file format. It's a different way of saving your files. You're probably familiar with JPEG files. That's the way just about every picture on the web is displayed. JPEG works good, but it's heavily compressed. So your camera by default will be writing JPEGs, which means it takes all the information for the sensor and actually throws out a bunch of really good information. All that like great detail in the shadows and the brightest parts of the sky, it just discards them. It takes everything in the middle and makes a JPEG out of it. If you want to keep all those highlights and shadows, you can set the camera to record RAW files, and those files will be bigger. But if you edit your pictures later in Lightroom or Photoshop, you can actually go back and recover details and clouds that are completely blown out and bring up shadows that seem completely black. This camera makes beautiful, fantastic RAW files, and unless you're shooting thousands of pictures like you would for sports and wildlife, I turn RAW on. So to turn RAW on, I'll hit the menu button here. I'll go to the camera icon, and then near the top on the second page, you'll see NEF RAW recording. NEF is the Nikon RAW file format. So here you can see it's giving you a couple of options, and the default option, lossless compressed, is my favorite option. It means the files will be a little bit smaller. Now let's scroll up to image quality, and it says fine right now. That means JPEG fine. So I scroll to the right to select that. I'm going to scroll up until I get to NEF RAW. Now, it also gives you options for recording RAW and JPEG files, and that can be okay. I just don't use that because my computer will automatically read in those RAW files and generate JPEG files for me anyway. So I don't need the camera to necessarily make those JPEG files. I use Adobe Lightroom. I have a book on it. You should check it out. It makes working with RAW files really easy. If you want me to go on and show examples of why you should use RAW files, here's another free link, sdp.io/rawvjpeg. Now let's talk about metering. Metering is the camera's logic that it uses to auto-expose a scene. So it looks at the scene, maybe it sees a face in the scene and determines that it should brighten the face up so that it's properly exposed, or maybe it looks at the entire scene and balances everything evenly. That's called metering. And the default metering system, the matrix metering system, is fantastic. I never change it. I never ever change it because it works great. And when it doesn't work great, I use exposure compensation to fix that. If you're an old school like film shooter and you know how to use like spot metering and all that, you might want to change it, but the rest of us probably won't. Metering, changing the metering is really easy. There's a button dedicated for it. It's this weird graphic button here. Hold that down. And now you can scroll the back dial here to choose between spot metering, which is the little dot, center weighted, which is the dot in parentheses, or this sort of weird graphic here, which is the matrix metering, which is the best. The metering system is really smart. It can even detect faces in the scene so that it will properly expose faces. You can also tune the metering settings by going to the pencil icon, the B page, and then B5 through B7. You can see the matrix metering has an option for detecting faces or not. I like it turned on. You can also control, if you're using center weighted metering, just how big that center weighted area is. Again, you don't need to do that. And you can even fine tune the exposure. If you go in to choose that option, you can tell the camera to always overexpose or underexpose. It's like adding in exposure compensation all the time. If you find that your camera is consistently under or overexposing, you can go in and adjust it there. There are also flash settings. This camera does not have a flash built in. A lot of Nikon cameras do. This one does not, just I guess for the weather sealing. It's completely sealed up. You can put, of course, an external flash on the top here. If you do that and you want to configure it, I'll just show you pencil icon, page E. You'll see there are a bunch of settings here for configuring the flash. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about that. You can just put the flash on and not configure any settings. Everything will work automatically for you. If it's a manual flash, a non-Nikon flash, you might have to change the flash sync speed. Maybe studio lights, you'd have to do that. Another setting you might want to change, but you never need to, is white balance. Your eyes see a piece of paper as white, whether it's under blue LED lights or yellow halogen lights, or the sort of green lights that you might get from city streets. That's basically your brain adjusting to whatever light source it happens to be under. That's great. Your brain basically has an auto white balance system. But those light sources are actually different colors. If you shine a yellow light on a white piece of paper, it's going to look a little bit yellow. So your camera tries to do the same kind of auto white balance that your brain does, and it's turned on by default, and it works better than you can probably do manually. I discussed this in Chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography and Chapter 3. If you want to manually change your white balance, there's a WB button up here. Just hold that down, and now you can go in and manually tune it. So you can pick the exact color that matches the current light source. Probably never going to be necessary. Another way to do it is to turn the info off here. And as I hold this down, you can see on the LCD on the top here, A is for auto white balance. And as I scroll this to the right, it shows a little picture of the different light source. Like that's an incandescent light, that's a fluorescent light, that's the sun, that's a flash, a cloudy day. You can just pick the light source that happens to match your current environment. If you shoot RAW, you can adjust the white balance after the fact perfectly with absolutely no penalty. Even if you shoot JPEG, you can generally fix the white balance without any problem at all. So that's one reason. I like the auto white balance, and it's easy to fix in post. So even if I don't nail it, it's not usually a problem. Quickly, I'll show you how to record video. This camera has amazing quality 4K video, records up to half an hour. To record video, there's a switch down here in the lower right corner. Just flip that down to the video camera and then hit the LV button in the middle there. And you're ready to record. Now, there's a record button up here. You can usually want to focus it before you start recording and then hit that red record button and it will start recording. That's basically all you have to worry about. There are a few things you can tune for the video settings. I'll hit the menu button here and you see it has its own menu with the video camera icon here. One you're going to want to tune is the frame size and frame rate. So as I select that, I think by default it's set to 1920 by 1080 at 30p. You can jump up to 60p, which means 60 frames a second. Normally when we watch television, it's at 24 frames a second in Europe or 30 frames a second in the US. And that's what we're used to seeing. 60p is twice that what we normally see in the US, and it makes everything seem really smooth and much more lifelike. I love 60 frames a second. 1080p is very sharp. That's what we call Ultra HD. You can go to 4K video, which is 3840 by 2160, which has 4 times more pixels than Ultra HD. It's an outrageous number of pixels. It's perfect for editing your video because you can crop in later. Anyway, we shoot everything we can in 4K, including this video. It allows for just a lot of different options, and displaying on really large monitors, it still looks great. So for that reason, I generally shoot everything in 4K. It will use up a bunch of memory though. So you can select that option and then just get to shooting. This camera has an interval timer built in, which is great for creating time lapses or, for example, star trails. To turn on the interval timer, I'll hit the menu button here. First, I'll go back to camera mode. I'll hit the menu button. I'll go up to the camera icon. and scroll all the way down to the bottom. There we go. The last item, interval timer shooting. I'll scroll to the right here, and you can see I can control a bunch of different options. By default, it's going to be taking one picture. I want to take more than one picture. So, for example, I could have it take 100 pictures by setting it like that. When you change the options, be sure you hit OK, or else it will forget your settings. If you're doing a time lapse, go ahead and select exposure smoothing. That will have the camera more gradually increase the exposure so you won't get big jumps in the exposure. Now, the interval controls how long it waits between shots. So, for example, for star trails, you'd basically want to set this as low as possible, which is, well, it lets you set it to 0. So now it will continuously take those shots. You could also have a 1-second delay between the shots. When you're ready, you'll hit OK. And when you're ready to actually shoot, go up to Start here, and then scroll to the right, and now it's actually shooting. So you can see it's taking one picture every single second. When I want to pause it, I'll hit the OK button. That just pauses it. Now I can go in and actually turn off the interval timer. I can restart it. So I'll just go ahead and select off. And my interval is done. You can set it to take 1,000 pictures over the course of a couple of hours and make just really gorgeous time lapses using something like a time-lapse software in Lightroom, or using a video editing software that makes time lapses. Great camera for that. Mirror lockup. DSLRs have a mirror in them. The mirror bounces the light up to your eye when you look through the viewfinder. I'll take the lens off. You can kind of see in there. See that angled thing? That's a mirror. And when you take a picture, the first thing that happens is the mirror moves out of the way, and then the shutter, which is behind the mirror, opens up. It moves too fast for you to see. But that mirror, you can see it's got some weight to it. It actually shakes the camera a little bit, and that can reduce the sharpness of your picture. To improve the sharpness of your pictures when you're working on a tripod, it only makes a difference when you're working on a tripod, you can turn on mirror lockup mode. I'll hit this button here to move the shutter dial over to MUP, mirror lockup. And now the first time I push the shutter, it locks the mirror up, and the next time I push it, it activates the shutter, takes the picture, and then once the picture's taken, moves the mirror back down. So now opening the mirror is a two-phase process. You don't necessarily have to do that. You never really have to use mirror lockup. I always just use live view. You can see, I'll turn on live view here, and the mirror moves out of the way when you turn live view on anyway. So instead of using mirror lockup, just turn on live view. That also means you can actually see what's going on, because without live view, you can't actually see anything. Now let's talk about the wireless connectivity, the SnapBridge tool. This is fantastic. It's changed the way I shoot. SnapBridge will automatically move small versions of your pictures over to your smartphone. That way, your smartphone can, your pictures are waiting for you, and you don't have to go through some process to download the pictures from your camera or put the memory card in your computer. You can be traveling, take a picture, and it's waiting for you to instantly put up on Twitter or Instagram or wherever. At the moment, SnapBridge is only available for Android phones. It's not available for iOS. So you can't put it on your iPhone or your iPad. I know, right? But Nikon promises that they'll have an iOS app coming up soon. So if you're watching this in the future, you're definitely watching it at some point in the future. If you're watching it more than a few days in the future, maybe that app is out. Hopefully it is. I'll show you how to get it set up on the camera at least. I'll hit the menu button here, and I'll go over to the wrench icon and scroll down a bit, down to the third page. And you'll see this option for connect to smart device. So I'll scroll right here, and you have the option for password protection. It's not something I worry about, because who's gonna like jump in during the setup process? But if you're really paranoid, you could turn password protection on. I'll select start and scroll to the right, and it basically walks you through the rest of the process. So you can just read the instructions here. What you're gonna have to do is install the SnapBridge app on your phone, and then get the two working together, but it walks you through everything. And once you do that, the two, your phone and your camera, are linked up, and you can go down to the Send to Smart Device option here and just turn that on. And when you have that turned on, every picture you take, the camera will by default send over a 2 megabyte version to your phone. You have the option to send the full-sized file to your phone, but that's very, very slow. It takes a long time to transfer the pictures, and if you're taking pictures on a regular basis, it never gets caught up. So I don't find that useful, but the small version is perfectly fine for Twitter or Instagram or whatever, so that's what I use instead, and I really do find it useful. So I'll turn that on. And you'll want to make sure you have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth on, though it actually uses Bluetooth to do the actual background transfers. That way it can just kind of stay connected all the time, and you don't have to have your phone connected to the camera, which would prevent it from getting to the internet. Now, if you're going to be taking hundreds or thousands of pictures, like if you're shooting your kid's soccer game, you don't really want the camera sending 1,000 pictures to your phone, because it will just do that. And it will burn up all the batteries and it will fill up all the storage space on your phone. So if you're going to do that, be sure you select Send to Smart Device and turn it off. And I'm not going to walk you through every aspect of using the app, because they update the app regularly, and I'm afraid that by the time you watch this, it's all going to be out of date anyway. But the app is actually fairly intuitive. Once you browse the pictures, you're able to select them on the phone and then share them through some other app like Instagram. But you should just be able to pick up your phone and see everything waiting for you. I want to show you a trick about the virtual horizon. I already showed you that if you're in live view, this can get you level pictures all the time. You can just hit that info button a couple of times and it will show you the virtual horizon. You can also go to menu, the wrench icon here, and go all the way up to page 1. And you'll see the virtual horizon option here. You can select that and it will pop a little bit bigger on the screen. Just a great way to make sure you get level landscape photos. You will eventually fill up your memory cards, especially shooting 10 frames a second. Once you do, put them in your computer, offload everything, and then back up your computer so you don't lose them. Then you can reformat the memory card and reuse them. I'll hit the menu button here and go up to the very first option under the wrench icon, Format Memory Card. And now what I can do is I can select the slot that I want to format, the XQD or the SD card slot, scroll to the right, select yes, and then click OK. And then it will actually format it for me. It's as easy as that. It doesn't hurt to format your memory card every now and then so you don't fill it up. But if you have a massive memory card and you don't take that many pictures, there's no need to format it. You can just keep shooting until, of course, you fill it up. What if you accidentally format your memory card? There are a lot of companies out there that will try to charge you $50 or $100 for some recovery software. There's absolutely free recovery software. I have no association with them. It's just free software. Go to stp.io/photorec. You can download it for Windows, Mac, or Linux. Put your memory card in your computer, and it will spend some time combing through your memory card. And in my experience, it works almost all the time. It will recover all of your different files. Terribly useful tool. The buttons on the camera, you don't necessarily need to customize them. But if you find yourself wishing some buttons did something different, or wishing you had a button that did a feature that's not available on buttons, you can customize them. So they're available. I'll hit the menu button here. I'll go to the pencil icon, page F, which is controls. And you'll see a bunch of different menu options here for configuring different controls. You can configure what the multi-selector center button does. That's this little button in the middle of the directional pad here. You can change the shutter speed and aperture lock. You can customize the command dials. The multi-selector here is this thumbstick. The most useful is going to be this first option here, which is the custom control assignment. So when I scroll to the right here, I can now scroll through all the different buttons, and it graphically tells you which button you're customizing. So FN1. There's an FN1 button right here. I'll select that, and now I can control what that button does. By default, it does nothing. So you might want it to do something. Maybe you want to jump to a preset focusing point or change the AF area mode. You could do aperture preview to shut down the aperture and make your display really dark. I really don't need any more buttons, but you know what? Viewfinder Virtual Horizon. That's a useful one. So I'll select that one. And now when I look through the viewfinder and hit the FN1 button, it will display a virtual horizon inside the viewfinder. You'll see it on the bottom and the right side. Browse through the different customizations after you spend some time with the camera and figure out what your optimal button assignment is, because it's very specific to how you personally shoot. It will take you some practice to remember to hit those buttons instead of going into the menus, but eventually it will save you some time. You should not have the beeping enabled on any camera. I think it's actually disabled by default on this camera, but in case your camera is beeping for focus confirmation and such, that's annoying to the people around you, especially if you're a wedding photographer, you don't want to be making extra sounds. So go to the wrench icon here, go down to page 2, and the bottom of page 2, you'll see the option for beep. I'll select that. Make sure volume is set to off. Thank you for making your camera quiet. You'll still have visual confirmation. It's okay. The Nikon camera has a system called menu banks, which basically allow you to, in theory, what it does is it saves profiles either for like sports or wildlife or for Tony and Chelsea, different photographers. And I want to mention them because I don't want you to go down the rat hole that is the menu banks. Ultimately, they're not that useful because they don't get reset each time you select them. You can't save a group of settings and then come back to it later. If you update those settings, you will be automatically updating the current menu bank. It's kind of different from how it works in Canon and other camera systems, and I've yet to talk to a photographer that actually finds them useful. Everybody says, oh, I tried it, but it doesn't remember my settings, it just overrides them. So as a result, I just want to say, don't bother with the menu banks. It's probably not worth your time. However, My Menu is a great time saver. My Menu saves you all that scrolling. I've spent so much time being like, go to the camera icon, go down to page 3, because there are so many menu settings, right? So many menu settings. And you can't search them or anything. It's so hard to find what you're looking for. My Menu lets you put just the options that you want to see quickly, just those things that you use on a regular basis. So it's this last icon down here at the very bottom, right above the question mark. So scroll down to that and you'll see under My Menu, you'll see Add Items, and then the last item here is Choose Tab. If you're not going to set up My Menu, then go to Choose Tab, select it, and select Recent Settings. Recent Settings just shows you those settings that you've changed recently. So you can see over the course of making this tutorial, I've changed a bunch of settings, and it's just showing me those. Recent settings is a good way to sort of automatically call through the things you do recently, because if you've done something again, if you've done something before, it'll be under your recent settings menu. If you want to customize it so that they're always in the same place, go down to that menu item, select Choose Tab, and then select My Menu. Then you can select Add Items, and you can see all the different menu items here. Go through and, maybe you always switch between RAW and JPEG. Let's see, where is it? Oh, photo shooting menu. Image quality, that's something that you change all the time. Plus press OK to select it. And it's the only option, so it's going to be right at the top here. Add items, you can go down to custom shooting menu, autofocus, AFC priority selection, press OK. And so now you can see My Menu has 2 different menu items that I can select from. They're always going to be right here under My Menu. That makes it much easier to find those particular menu items. Customize it, put all your favorite settings there. That wraps up the tutorial part of this. Now we'll talk about some accessories that you can get that will do a lot for your photography. First, good software makes a big difference. And right now, really the only software out there is Adobe Lightroom and Adobe Photoshop. You can get them both together for like $10 a month, at least in the US. Prices can vary. Go to sdp.io/Adobe deal. And I don't really have a relationship with Adobe, but I do have a couple of books that will help you make sense of those kind of confusing apps. It's the best thing out there. Now talking about some hardware accessories, the first thing you're going to want to get is more batteries, because even during the course of just recording this, I've burned through a battery. How much battery you use depends on, well, first, if you use the wireless feature, SnapBridge, you're going to be burning through a lot of batteries. If you're doing video or using live view a lot of batteries. And you always want to have an extra charge battery on you. You can get knockoff batteries, and I will tell you to get off-brand stuff for other things, but not for batteries, because in my experience, off-brand batteries fail quickly and will eventually leave you stranded. So I recommend getting the actual original Nikon battery, even though it's like 45 bucks. It's like painful. You can pick it up at sdp.io/EL15. I get a few pennies out of every dollar when you use my link, so I appreciate you using them. You might also want a vertical grip for this. The vertical grip goes on the bottom of the camera, and it allows you to hold the camera vertically more easily. It adds some weight and heft to the camera, which some people like and some people hate. But I know a lot of people using this camera will want to be able to hold it vertically. It duplicates the focus selector and the shutter button on it, and the Nikon version of this is like 400 bucks, which you could buy like a whole other camera for 400 bucks. There is a knockoff version of this, which is good, and that's the one I linked to here, sdp.io/D17. It's like 80 bucks. So it's like 1/5 the price, and it's just about as good. For general shooting, my favorite lens is the Nikon 18-140, which is a kit lens, but it's an excellent lens. If you did not get a kit lens with your camera, I would go on eBay or Amazon Marketplace and get a used copy of this, because it's kind of expensive new, but it's super cheap used. One place you can buy it used is sdp.io/N140. That's Amazon, but you'll see a little link for buying stuff used, and it will be way cheaper that way. It's not a sharp lens, but it's okay. It's good. It's a good kit lens. It's nice and versatile. And if I'm just walking around town and I just want to get pictures of whatever pops up, that's the lens I'm putting on my camera because it's so versatile. If I want the sharpest results, this is the lens that I use. That's the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. It's pro. It's beautiful. It is literally the best versatile normal lens you can buy for any APS-C camera. It's one of my favorite lenses ever made. It's kind of expensive, but you already dropped $2,000 on the body, right? You got to put some good glass on it. Pick it up at sdp.io/S35N. I highly recommend it. If you're shooting landscapes and you want to go wider than this will allow, well, you're going to get the best results by still using this and maybe shooting a panorama and stitching the pictures together. I discussed panoramas in Chapter 2 of Stunning Digital Photography, but if you just want a super wide angle lens, this is the best lens. It's the Nikon 10-24. You can get it at that link there. Now, note that it's not quite, my big lens is blocking my link. It's not quite as sharp as this beautiful Sigma lens, but it's still good. If you want to shoot portraits, the lens I recommend is another Sigma lens, this beautiful 50-100 f1.8, a fantastic lens that takes incredibly sharp pictures that you won't get out of any Nikon lens. It also gives you just fantastic background blur. It's our favorite portrait lens. This and the D500 are an amazing combination for shooting portraits. If you're shooting sports, I recommend the Tamron 70-200 f2.8. Going out to 200 millimeters gives you that extra reach. You won't necessarily appreciate it for portraits because it kind of shrinks when you're shooting up close. But for shooting far away subjects, I really like the Tamron 70-200. It's not as fast, but it has more reach than the Sigma lens. If you want even more reach for things like wildlife, grab this bad boy here, the Nikon 200-500. This on the D500, we use it all the time for wildlife. It's a fantastic combination that makes incredibly sharp shots. If you're thinking about getting some prints, I've made a whole review of different printmaking facilities in the US only. Go to sdp.io/printit to watch that. MPix, basically, I like MPix. They're not a sponsor. They just did a really good job on all of our prints. I'll recommend a couple of tripods. Everybody should at least get a cheap tripod because tripods are useful. Here's a $50 tripod that I really like, the Dolica tripod. Pick it up at this link down here. Or if you want a good travel tripod, my favorite tripod currently is the Manfrotto Be-Free. Go to sdp.io/Be-Free to pick that one up. It's super lightweight, so you won't mind carrying it with you, and the tripod that you have with you is the best tripod. And it weighs like 2 pounds and a little bit of change. It's a good all-around tripod. Don't forget, you'll want to get a big XQD card because at 10 frames a second, you will fill up your memory card fast, really, really fast. That 4K video will fill it up fast too. sdp.io/XQD takes you to a list of different XQD cards that are currently available at Amazon. bigger is always better. Even though they're expensive, nobody's ever regretted having too much capacity. You'll also want to put an SD card in the second slot there for backup or overflow. If you're using it just for overflow, I'll sometimes get just a really cheap 128 gig or 256 gig SD card. That way, even if I fill up my fast XQD card, things might slow down some, but I won't run out of space. At least I can keep shooting even if I have to slow down. And finally, the best investment you can make is in education, because gear isn't going to get you good pictures. Your education is going to make more of a difference, and our materials are super cheap. They're really cheap. You drop $2 on a body. These books, the ebooks are $10 each. The paperbacks are about $20 each, and you can get bundles together at the store that are even cheaper. Go to Amazon, search for Tony Northrup, look at the reviews on these books. You'll see people like them. My photography book is the #1 photography book in the entire world. It has like more than 1,600 reviews right now, and people really like it. Buy it direct from us, and we ship worldwide, sdp.io/store. Thank you for your support. You can also get just way more free videos, free educational videos about photography, camera reviews, other stuff like that. If you subscribe to this channel, YouTube will let you know when we have new videos coming up. So hit that subscribe button, hit like if this was helpful, and share this video with your friends, or share the sdp.io/tutorial link in case they have a different camera. Thanks, and bye.